moving into chapter 9 with the cross-linguistic influence and learner language, we start to look at the concept of that when you learn a new language, you are always comparing the new language to your language, to your first language. And I think one of the most significant applications for this is, at first, we think that all of our errors are going to come from the differences between the new language and our language. So different word order, different pronunciation or different sounds, different words, of course. And that all of these errors we're going to make, these interlanguage errors, are going to come from basically comparing the two languages as the contrastive analysis hypothesis, like a strong version of the contrastive analysis hypothesis. And we could even predict the errors we're going to make, or we can predict all the errors everyone from one language to another language are going to make based on this analysis of how exactly knowing all the differences. But this overlooks another big variable, which is the intra-language errors, intralingual errors, which are basically the errors that even a first language learner makes when they're learning their first language. These are errors based on the difficulty of the system, difficulty of the language system. So, like kids learning English who are going to say walked, talked, and then they're going to add ed to every verb and say, I thinked, and I goed, and I throwed something, and they're just overgeneralizing that rule. So intralingual errors are errors just that everyone makes in learning that new system. And we believe that actually accounts for most of the errors that you're going to make. When you really learn a language kind of the natural way, getting into a language naturally, most of your errors will be more intralingual and less from confusing your first language with your second language. And another distinction would be, by the way, an error versus a mistake. And an error is when you don't know the rule, you haven't really learned it or practiced it, so you need more work on that. Whereas a mistake would be, you know the rule, you can correct yourself, but you just made a mistake. You had a moment where you couldn't apply the rule correctly. We also have the overt errors, which are clearly errors. They're easy to see that you made a grammar mistake or used the wrong word, but a covert error would be where your grammar seems to be okay, but you're not applying it correctly in that context, so it's kind of hidden, but you're still making a type of error in that case. So another variable would be, how different is your language from the language that you're learning? Is it in a similar language group, or is it a complete jump into a whole nother writing system, culture, pronunciation system that has tones like a tonal language? And theoretically, the closer the new language is to your language, it should be easier for you. But we don't always find this to be true, because we find that when people learn English, if they're from a similar language like French, they're not necessarily going to have a real easy time learning English, easier than like a Japanese speaker, because there's so many other variables besides just how different those languages are. And again, when you learn a language in a natural way, then you can see most of your mistakes, again, not as much from translating, but more just from getting into the new system and learning the new system. There's lots of mistakes you can make. You can get the wrong order. You can maybe your language has like a false cognate, where your language has a word that seems very similar to the new language, but actually has a different meaning, even though the spelling might be similar or the pronunciation can kind of trick you there. Sometimes your language has one word, but you'll find the new language has two words that are slightly different for that one concept. So you have to learn that distinction. or maybe the opposite, where your language has two different words, but it just goes into one language in the new one word in the new language, and that could be another kind of interlingual type of error that you might make. The interlanguage is your imperfect ability to use the language at a certain time. That's your learner language. And what's interesting is that you're actually following rules. Even though your rules are imperfect, you have a system. You're being systematic. Even though you're making mistakes, you're following the system that you think should work. So the learner language or interlanguage, you could say you're making mistakes, but you're actually following the rules that you think will apply. And so, and then over time you improve on those so that you're not making those mistakes. So just the cross-linguistic influence would be sort of a weaker version of really the contrastive analysis hypothesis. And also, when you make a mistake, we can analyze why you made it. We can analyze whether you forgot the rule, or whether you're making the same mistake that everyone makes, from that language to the new language, where it's kind of predictable, that mistake you're making. So we can analyze those errors and then maybe find out where they're coming from and then create a lesson to fix that. Okay, so this becomes an interesting study of error analysis, and you can do that when you're working with a student and they make a mistake or an error, and you can think, why did they make that? Like, what rule are they confusing, or are they, thinking of their language and getting confused with the new language? So we can always be analyzing these. And again, going back to learning a second language the natural way, where you're learning this new system and kind of getting a feel for it.